Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Blue Crew Podcast, the show hosted by Gen Z Democrats for Gen Z Democrats. Here we'll discuss current events, policy, and politics from the perspective of young voters. In an ever-changing political landscape, we believe it's important to facilitate open dialogue in order to promote national unity. Stick around for the newest episode of The Blue Crew. All right, everybody, welcome back to another Blue Crew podcast. Today, we are joined with State Senator Jeremy Moss. Jeremy, thank you for joining us today. I just want to go through, before you even say hi, I just want to go through a little bit of your accomplishments. So you're a Michigan State grad. In 2013, Senator Moss was successful in advocating for the creation of a new economic development committee. He was elected to serve the 35th District of the Michigan House of Representatives in 2014. In 2016, he was reelected and he served as the Democratic whip for the House. In 2018, Senator Moss was elected to represent the 11th Michigan Senate District. And now, well, actually, I guess you still hold the title as the youngest ever elected official on the Southfield City Council. That was in 2011. So we are super excited to have you on the show. Thank you for coming. The floor is yours.
No, thanks for having me. This is important stuff. Once upon a time in 2011, I was a 25-year-old city councilman. I was the youngest councilman in the city's history. I was the youngest by 30 years when I served on the council. I was the newest council member by a decade. And I served at the time with the oldest local elected official in the state of Michigan, who was 93. So I have some battle scars from all that time, and happy to lend advice. But I appreciate your enthusiasm. You're carrying the torch. You're the next generation that's going to be the youngest this, the youngest that, talking with this generation's group of elders and putting your perspective into the discussion on public policy. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
Well, we appreciate that. Last episode, we all talked about why we're in politics, why we're doing this. So I think, the first question to ask you, it's only fitting, is what encouraged you? What specific life experience or event, or even if it wasn't anything in particular, why politics? Why are you now Michigan's 11th District State Senator? And what got you started?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in campaigns and politics. I think it might have just started with the fact that my parents put the news on in our house a lot. And I went on to be very interested in the journalism field, actually graduated from Michigan State University with a degree in journalism. And so
Actually, Senator, sorry to interrupt you. I'm looking through all your accomplishments and every single one looks great except for the fact you graduated from Michigan State.
All right, I'm going to log off. If that's the direction we're going, go
we
green.
We got some state students here, but me and Vanch were
all right, good. I'm glad. I'm glad at least I have some Sparty representation here.
That's right.
But the good news about being a Michigan State Spartan is that it's 4 miles up the road from the state capitol building. And so it really provided a huge opportunity for me to kind of harness that excitement about politics and policy and take several internships at the state capitol when I was a Spartan. But even going back to the year that I graduated high school, it was 2004. And on that ballot, we had an amendment here in Michigan to change our state constitution to affirm that marriage is only between one man and one woman. And as you may know, or is in my bio as well, is that I'm the first openly gay member of the Michigan Senate, one of the first openly gay members of the legislature. But as a young person, what a slap in the face at the time when I was 18 years old to recognize that we vote on other people's rights, that it is subject to a group of lawmakers, it is subject to a group of the electorate to determine people's futures and their prosperity, whether they're gay, whether they're minorities, people of color, whether they're women. Politics comes into play. I hear, a lot, why do you make politics out of your orientation? It's because the politics are thrown at us. The politics are thrown at me. There's no other way to resolve some of these barriers other than to get involved in politics. And really, that's what propelled me to continue to be engaged. We can vote to provide assistance, services, access to people, or we can vote to take it away and restrict it and reduce it. And so being in politics and being in this fight, obviously I'm on the side of access and freedom. And so that's what keeps me going and keeps me fueled in this arena.
Yeah. I mean, that was 20 years ago, and these fundamental rights, these basic freedoms are still under attack. So,
We're still talking about it,
yeah.
and where politicians fail us, as they failed me when I was a young person, as they're failing young people today, it really kind of must compel the voters to act and speak out.
So on that point, I wanted to know, how has getting into politics at a younger age form your own beliefs, and has it led to any obstacles in your career?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly being on that city council. When I ran, I was 24 years old when I filed the paperwork and joined the campaign trail. And for me, I was a lifelong resident of the city. I was as active and engaged as a 24-year-old could be. I was very affiliated and closely tied to our mayor, who was Brenda Lawrence at the time, who became our congresswoman. And thought I was very in tune civically to what was going on, but I also knew that I was a young person, and I couldn't hide it. I looked like a young person when I was going to doors and sending out mail, and really, honestly, it was embraced by the public. So in that race for city council, there ended up being 8 candidates that were on the ballot in that general election in November of 2011. I ended up placing first place in that election. So it really was a demonstration from the electorate that they valued a young person, that I didn't have to, prop myself up anything other than what I was, a fresh set of eyes, a new voice, a new perspective. And I took that on the council with every decision that I made. I was inquisitive. I was asking questions. If I didn't know something, there was a very big likelihood that somebody else probably didn't know it in the community, and it was worth asking a question at council meetings. So I think, being the youngest was important. Being the newest in 10 years on the council was important. And I think it really guided the city to the next generation of success in our community. We, as most communities at the time, were at a crossroads. There was a recession. And we were talking about how to attract young people into our community. And it was very, very important that a young person was at the table.
Who better to ask than the young person?
Exactly.
What the young
Exactly.
people need.
I mean, the council was debating, how do we attract young families? And it was 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, and a 90-year-old having that discussion. So it was very important to have somebody who was also invested in the future of our community on a different end of the age spectrum to be a part of that.
Yeah, and were there any times that you felt like you weren't treated as seriously by your older colleagues, or you felt discouraged by your age?
Only every day. But the reality is that I knew that the voters placed me there. I knew that the voters knew exactly who they were voting for. I ran on being a new voice, being a young perspective, and I was buoyed by that. So, it was challenging, very much so. I remember the 93-year-old who, on and off we got along. So I don't want to dog on him too much, but there was one council meeting where I remember he just got so flustered with me that he said, "Jeremy Moss, you don't know anything about anything." And then he got up and actually left the meeting because he was frustrated by something that I contributed to the group or wanted to say or whatever at the time I was doing. So yeah, it was very, very challenging. When I ran, they sent out a mailer that called me a novice and a neophyte. I had to look up in the dictionary what neophyte meant, which it means novice. So ultimately, but it was very important though. It was very important to have, we were a community that valued diversity in race and diversity in religion and diversity all across the board. And it was very, very important I felt, and so did the community, to have diversity of age on that city council.
I have my next question here, which is about the Southfield City Council. How did you begin the in the Southfield City Council? Like, what was your, I should run for city council?
Yeah. So I, again, with being very interested in policy and politics and campaign work, I was 18 years old, right out of high school, when I met Brenda Lawrence at a political event, and she really took me under her wing and mentored me. I cut my teeth on one of her early campaigns in 2005, and then worked on another one of her campaigns in 2008 and 2009. And so she really taught me the ropes, and really demonstrated how people-centered this field has to be. You have to meet people where they are. You have to understand what their needs are. And so from a very young age, I was out chatting with Southfield residents on her behalf, on her campaign work, and then also interned in her office at City Hall. And so again, being very in tune to the city council and knowing it was a council of elders, which their perspective is just as valuable. But I thought to myself, this would be just as unreflective of the community if that we had a council of 25-year-olds making a decision for everybody. So why should I settle with the fact that it is a council of older people making this decision, especially as we're talking about what's the future of this community going to look like? So with her support, Brenda Lawrence's support, with the support of all the people that I met through her network, who became some of my strongest supporters even to this day, I put my name on the ballot. I knocked doors. And again, I had a lot of credentials. I had a lot of credibility. I worked in and around our civic life. I was a lifelong resident of the city, which I still am. And when I knocked that very first door, as we were knocking doors, I made this pitch to the person who answered the door about why I wanted to run for this seat on the city council. And the person interrupted me and put up their finger and said, don't say anything else. And I thought, was I wrong here? Did I mess it up? She goes, "You're young. I'm voting for you." So it wasn't just an army of young people backing me. It was a whole range of people who knew that adding a younger voice was imperative to the city's vitality. And so that's kind of the story about how I first ran.
That's awesome. And then I do kind of have a second part to that. So what do you think was like your biggest accomplishment while on that city council? Like, what is that thing that you did that you are happy about?
That's a great question. I mean, we did a lot of work. So this was climbing out of that Great Recession period in 2009, 2010. I was on the council in 2011. And so one of the major things that we had before us is there's this main thoroughfare in Southfield, Evergreen Road. And we were talking about the reconstruction of Evergreen Road. And it was 3 lanes heading north and 3 lanes heading south and a middle turn lane. And there was a lot of wear and tear, and it was time to repair it. And we had an opportunity to rethink our main corridor through our city. And there was a big debate on it. Some folks said, it would be cheaper just to put a different slab of concrete on the same old road. And I was a big advocate for rethinking it. We added in traffic circles and took out the traditional intersection. We added a center median. We expanded sidewalks. We added bike lanes because it was evident that we needed to cater to a different vision for our community, a walkable corridor, not just for young people, but there are baby boomers that wanted to age in place in our community and wanted to get out and about, but it was just this traditional big, busy road. And so it was something that I really pushed for, to rethink how we could do road construction and how we could do that and create a sense of community. So here we are, some 10 years later, more than 10 years later. This road project has contributed to the vitality of Southfield. Businesses wanted to be a part of it, and we voted on new frontage, new businesses, new shops, new eateries. There was an office space that totally converted itself into lofts to kind of create new housing in our community. Lawrence Tech is right off of this big corridor. They partnered with us. They created more dorms and more on-campus living experiences, all because we rethought what should our main corridor look like. And I think it was a young person driving, that conversation that made all the difference. And so now I actually I live in a townhouse off of that corridor, and I'm able to enjoy it. I'm able to enjoy our walkability in our community and not have to navigate through 7 lanes to cross the road.
Yeah.
And it really has created a sense of community in the city.
That's awesome.
I like that. Yeah, that's great.
We had a debate about trash receptacles. It was really like old thinking versus new thinking. And I remember one of my elder colleagues said, well, we don't have parades of walkers in this town. We don't have all these people walking around. And I said, well, what if we did? Like, that's the vision we want.
Yeah.
It's to create what can be, not just be complacent about what is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that. And I love that you live off that road now. I think that's great.
And so we finally, 10 years later, so I was on the council more than 10 years ago, 10 years later, we finally had a big, ribbon cutting. We completed all the trails. We completed all the walkways that we had, set out. It was miles and miles and years of work. And one of the things that we did was we had a parade of walkers. We had a marching band, and we had all of us lined up to enjoy all of these connected walkways throughout this corridor in our city. So it's like I got to experience it on both ends, and it's been really, really rewarding.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a very full circle kind of moment.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of young people, firstly, I want to make a mention. I am a Spartan, so you do have some representation here.
Yeah.
But white, I know Zach is gonna kill me after this meeting.
But
yeah. But you mentioned young people, of course, and we know that the Secretary of State reported that in 2022, Michigan had the highest youth turnout for that election, and it was around 37%, which was way above the average of 23%. 37% is a very good number, but that's still only a little bit over a quarter of young voters. We still have a lot to go. And our goal as a Blue Crew is, of course, to energize and get 18 to 25-year-olds registered and be engaged in politics and be engaged with the decision-making process of our government. So what would you say to Gen Z prospective voters who don't think their vote matters and maybe are thinking of skipping maybe this year's election?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, and has a very important answer to it. And I think a lot of it is about the work that our Democratic majority has done just in the last year and a half. So for 40 years, Republicans controlled the Michigan Senate. That is longer than I've been alive. And so it really is a generation where the Republicans controlled the governor's office and the House of Representatives for periods of time. But for 40 years, Senate Republicans either drove the agenda or had a veto power over everything. And where did that get us? You had LGBTQ folks who were trying to amend our state civil rights law to include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes from discrimination for 40 years, and Republicans didn't move it. You had a 1920s abortion felony law on the books that we should have taken off years and years ago. Republicans wouldn't let that happen. You had gun safety laws that people demanded and asked for with the pervasiveness of gun violence in our communities. And for 40 years, Republicans failed to address these issues. So we got into office and buoyed by, I think, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which was just a kind of a barbaric attack on reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy. And so we became this Democratic majority. And what are some of the first things that we did? We repealed that 1920s, 1930s abortion felony so that we could ensure that rights were protected along with the ballot proposal that passed. We've completed the 40-year journey on adding sexual orientation and gender identity to the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. That was my bill, but that baton had been passed from generation to generation, and we finally got it done. And then we enacted the first gun safety laws in a generation. including requiring safe storage to prevent minors from accessing firearms, expanding background checks that are so needed when people make gun purchases, creating red flag petitions so that we can prevent the next tragedy. So all of these things were built up over time and pent up, and it was the younger generation that said enough is enough. And so to that end, it's a deal. It's a trust between us and the voters. You voted for us to do things, and we did them. And that's how our system should work. And so when I look at young voters and look at their priorities and look at what they've demanded of us and the fact that we've delivered it, I hope it is kind of a rethinking of how government can work. For 40 years, Republicans neglected their needs, and the electorate couldn't sustain it anymore and voted them out. Within a year and a half, we moved forward as a Democratic majority on some of the most consequential things that young people were asking us to deal with. And we made them happen in a year and a half. So let's harness this momentum. Let's keep that promise, keep that trust between policymakers like myself and young voters like you, so that we can continue this momentum. And so that's the Michigan example. It really is an example for the whole country to look at. Michigan leaned in on some of these forward-thinking policies, and we're a more successful state as a result. And so I hope young voters see this as a promise that we are keeping as policymakers, and that really builds trust on delivering their vote and participating in this process.
Yeah, I mean, while we hear all these policies and these demands from younger voters, they're really just policies and issues that affect everybody. And so while you may be listening to us or the younger voters, it's something that will help our state for the better. So that's
Yeah,
really
that's
cool.
exactly right.
Yeah, building off of that, just in general for the Democratic Party, it's been really great, and we've all had a collective sigh of relief to see Vice President Harris gaining momentum and people getting excited about going out and doing work for the Democratic Party again. How do we keep that going through November and also use it to amplify down ballot races? Specifically, what type of race is most important for you to push personally? I know we have a pretty frail majority in the Michigan House and Senate, and we also have a frail majority in the National Senate. So what for you is the most important?
Yeah, I can tell you, as somebody who lived through several presidential election cycles as a voter, from my first vote was in 2004. So I've seen a presidential election or two in my lifetime. This energy, this excitement really feels like that first Obama campaign in 2008. I watched the rally that just happened in Atlanta. I know there's an announcement of a rally coming into Detroit. I mean, that excitement and momentum is palpable. You know, you can feel it. And so, and it's a big coalition. That's what that Obama coalition was. It was young voters, it was boomers, it was people of color, it was the LGBTQ community that all came together for the same cause of progress and moving forward. And so with Kamala Harris this year, and I think she's really harnessed this message of we're not going backwards, she's building that coalition again. She's building a forward and future thinking coalition. So I'm excited. And really, you know, it really does harken back to that 2008 cycle. So you get the opportunity to live through that now, too, with all that excitement. You know, as a state legislator, I can tell you how important it is to keep the Michigan House. We have a 1-vote majority in both the Senate and the House. Fortunately, the Senate is not up this year, but the Michigan House is. And again, talking about not going backward, it is very, very important that we keep the Michigan House and we harness this momentum. We have a lot of things that we're proud to run on, things that we've delivered, things that we've achieved that have, again, been a promise between us and the voter that we would achieve. And so keeping the Michigan House continues that momentum, and it really, you know, buys into that slogan of we can't go backward. If we were to lose the Michigan House, we have way too many MAGA Republicans in the House of Representatives that would ascend into leadership role, not only try to repeal all of the great work that we've done, but push forward policies that would continue to head us in the wrong direction. So I know that there's a lot of excitement on national politics and what goes on in Washington, D.C. and they get a lot more attention and they have a lot more clout and they have a lot more followers and following. But so much of your everyday policies that impact you on your everyday life come out of the state legislature. And so that's why it's really, really important to get active in the state legislative races here this year. And that's keeping the Michigan House blue.
I mean, yeah, I totally agree with that. I think a lot of people will say like, oh, Democrats and Republicans are the same, whatever. Like you hear a lot of that from disgruntled independents, but being in Michigan at this time is such like an absolute, it could not be further from the case. Having like a state house and Senate under Republican control for decades and decades, and then getting a blue trifecta and just pushing through this wave of amazing policy that helps people. It really just is like an amazing place to be, to show the dichotomy between progress and between basically old stuff that no one wants anymore. It's amazing.
All right, we're putting you on the campaign trail, Will, because you got to deliver that message to every voter.
I would love to. I whenever I go canvassing, that's what I throw out. So
good.
Yeah, well, I mean, Will, that's exactly it. We got to get that word out, and I think that's what we're trying to do here at the Blue Crew. Senator, if you want to come over, do some of our social media stuff, post a few TikToks, I think you'd persuade a few people, believe me.
Sure, count me in.
Yeah, well, so thank you for taking your time. You're very articulate. You're a very successful, accomplished senator. I guess just one last question before I give it over to you for some last points or advice. I feel like this is almost a taboo question to ask politicians. I almost never get a straight answer, but I'm just going to do it anyways. What's next? I know right now we're focusing on what you need to get accomplished and all legislation that you need to get passed. But do you see politics in your future forever? Are you thinking about stepping down maybe, or leaving room for more people? I think you've got a long way to go. I think you'd be successful on a national stage. So, what's next?
Well, it's certainly been a wild ride from the term on council to the 2 terms in the House to I will complete 2 terms in the Senate and be termed out in 2026. It'll be 15 years of very rewarding service. For me this year, one election at a time. It is, we all hands on deck. I mean, it changes every week, right? So it's like, who knows what next week is going to bring, let alone the next 100 days. So it's very, very important that we focus on this election. For me personally, in the legislature, I chair the elections committee. It's been very gratifying work to expand voter access where the Republican majority wanted to restrict voter access. So I'm going to stay in this fight on voting rights. We are making so much progress. We now have 9 days of early voting. We have increased access to absentee ballots. We're trying to reduce barriers to voting. And on top of that, we've learned our lessons from 2020 and all of the bad actors who wanted to dismantle our free and fair election system. And we've really tightened up election administration and made it stronger here in the state of Michigan. So I'm going to stay focused on voting rights and the policies that our election administrators and voters need.
That's right. And we thank you for that. All right, Senator Moss, any last words, any last pieces of advice?
Keep at it. I'm looking at what are energized Gen Z voters, and I really hope that you stay engaged. One day the next generation will be interviewing you on whatever platform exists at the time. So I hope one of you is the next 25-year-old city councilman in your hometown.
Thanks, Senator. Great interview. Appreciate your time.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Senator.
Thanks for listening, and remember to stay updated by following us on all our socials. Until next time, this has been the Blue Crew Podcast.